Very warm welcome to you all. I'm delighted to see so many people here, and I can't believe how popular this event has been. But obviously I want to extend a particularly warm welcome to Roger Dennis, who's come all the way over from New Zealand to talk to us today. He describes himself as an independent strategist, and if you look on his computer, I think it says an architect of serendipity, and we had a big debate about that yesterday as to whether you can really design serendipity, but we won't go there this morning. He was one of the pioneering program managers of the Canterbury programme starting over 10 years ago, and so we're particularly pleased to hear his determination, his story of those 10 years. He wanted me to make it clear to you that he isn't a clinician, so he doesn't come at this from a clinical background, and that's quite important. We're also delighted to say that as far as we know, with my fingers crossed, we have the Right Honourable Alistair Burt MP turning up probably around about 9:30 to hear Roger speaking. I have to give you his full title, Right Honourable Alistair Burt MP, and I have to read it because it's so long. Minister of State, Department of Health, Minister for Care and Support. And of course, those of you that know, he's also the MP for North East Bedfordshire, so he does know the area quite well. He does have a particular interest in integrated care. My experience of MPs turning up at conferences like this is they speak and they give you their ideas in about 3 minutes flat, and then they run for cover. Alistair's doing completely the opposite today. He's going to sit and listen to Roger, he's going to sit and listen to some of the conversation, particularly around the questions that Roger's asked by you, and then he is going to give just a very brief few words of his ideas and his translation as to what his thoughts about integration are for the future. So I'm really pleased that Alistair's coming. As I say, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Things changed rather dramatically over the weekend when Parliament was recalled, so it is possible he won't be able to make it, but we are very hopeful. So I have 3 particular aims for today, and those aims are that you are as inspired by the New Zealand story as I have been over the last couple of weeks. The second one is that you leave here today with a belief that change really can happen, and those of us in the room can drive that because there are such fantastic opportunities around at this moment in time to deliver that change. And then finally, I want all of us to commit to an aligned transformation plan, something that really makes sure that we deliver significant change and improve services for our patients. So Canterbury. Well, I'm going to leave Roger to do the job of giving you the statistics and the impressive outcomes that they've managed to achieve in Canterbury, albeit over a 10-year period. But there are some certain statistics which I can't not bring to your attention. The things that we are driving for all the time, like reduced attendances at A&E, reduced admissions, emergency admissions, and of course managing to keep within financial constraints. But in your booklet that we've given you today, you'll find there's a whole host of phrases that came out of the report written by the King's Fund, and several of them are very impressive. Things like 25% of capacity freed up across GPs. But the one that struck me most of all, the one that's really driven home is how important this has been, is the one that's on the front. The biggest waste we have in our health system is patient time. And if you think about that one, if you think about taking the waste of patient time out of the system, everything seems to slot into place. Diagnosis sooner means that the patient's treatment starts sooner, which means that they are less likely to get unfortunate complications of long-term illness. It means that unnecessary, unscheduled admissions are reduced. And many, many other examples can be brought to hand. So I'm leaving Roger to enthuse you about Canterbury. But what about understanding that there is a belief that we want to make change? Well, the story for us as an LMC so far is that back in November, we decided to have a 2-day strategy meeting. And from that 2-day strategy meeting, we invited Nigel Watson from Wessex LMC, my counterpart, and he gave the story of several of the programs that are running down in Wessex, which are saving time for patients, which are changing the lives of the GPs. And we had a window open to us about the fact in this area we really could make some changes if the LMC is prepared to step up to the plate and show some genuine leadership. And then we started thinking a bit wider about this, and just as a matter of interest, we're pulling together a directory of the research that we've done around the country so that we can actually start feeding that out to practices and out to federations so that they can be put into play around here in Hertfordshire. But if we start talking about resources, we have approximately £2.5 billion per year spent on health and social services. And if I calculate that right, we are spending something close to £8 million a day on health and social services in this area. That is a stunning figure. Instead of complaining about the fact that we haven't got enough, let's start really thinking about this vast sum of money that we're spending on a day-by-day basis. And when we start talking about resources, we did a rough calculation in the office, and we believe that nearly 20,000 people will turn up to work in the health and social care sector today. And that figure doesn't include dentists, optometrists, pharmacists, and it certainly doesn't include all those people that are caring for their spouses, their relatives, their children, or a friend. So we have fantastic resources. On top of that, our research also showed us that we believe there are something like 180 small, large, medium-sized transformation programs going on around Hertfordshire at this moment. 180. In fact, we've had difficulty in actually identifying a small fraction of those. So to me, that really goes to prove that there really is an appetite for change. There are people out there already driving this agenda. The next point I wanted to make is that when I decided that we would have this meeting, having grabbed the opportunity of Roger volunteering to come over to the UK, I decided to go and meet all of the chief executives of the key provider organisations and the commissioners. And I've spoken to a good many of you on the phone as well about this meeting, and I cannot believe the enthusiasm for talking about true and total integration. I have really had it welcomed all the way down the line. So I've been fired up by that enthusiasm, and what's made it so important to me is the fact that I believe we are almost aligned in our thinking. It just needs that extra push from those of us in this room to really make it a reality. I was going to give you a couple of examples of the good work that's going on around the country, around the county. Most of the CCGs, when they have their board meetings in public, start off with a patient story, either a videotape or they actually get the patient in. And a year or so ago, I heard the story about a man in his mid-50s who'd had a pretty devastating stroke and was admitted to the stroke unit. Within about 2 days, he was out of ITU and starting to make a reasonable recovery. A few days on a ward. Within a week, he was out into a rehab unit. Within 2 weeks, he was actually home with full support and with continuing rehabilitation. And by the time he came to that meeting, he was nearly recovered and certainly was back at work. And I was thinking to myself, probably only 6 or 7 years ago, he would have been lucky if he'd have survived it, let alone got away with minimal disability. He would have been severely disabled and certainly would never have got back to work. So those are the kind of lengths we've come to already. And I was quite inspired by the conversation on the radio yesterday morning, which a lot of you probably heard about Worthing Hospital, about a specialist floor in Worthing Hospital which looks after the slightly more complicated, complex emergency problems. And those patients are assessed and treatment is started very, very quickly. They have a daily multidisciplinary team ward round, which includes local authority social services department, instead of looking at EM, where they also have a deal with the social services department that if a patient comes in with a healthcare package, if that healthcare package isn't stopped the moment the patient walks through the door, it is continued for a further 48 hours, which means discharge can happen at least 3 days sooner than it would normally have happened, because they've recognised that once again, by wasting patients' time, leaving them sitting in a hospital bed, they are actually jeopardising that patient's life expectancy. So there's some fantastic work going on, both around the country and around Hertfordshire in particular. And so I really want to emphasise those three aims again. I want you to leave today inspired by Roger's story, and inspired by the journey that Canterbury have taken. I want you to really believe from the conversations that you're going to have on your table, you don't have to take my word for it, that there is an appetite for change, and people are already desperately trying to do that. It just needs true leadership to really build on those current projects and empower people to make the changes. And I want you all to feel that you can commit to a long-term transformation plan that is aligned by all of us, because only together can we make integration a reality. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to Beverly Flowers, who I'm sure most of you know is the Chief Executive of Eastern North Herts CCG. Beverly is also leading the STP process, the Sustainability and Transformation Programme. But I suspect some of you didn't know that she started her management in Marks and Spencer's up in Scotland, where she couldn't understand what they were saying and they couldn't understand what she was saying, but that's not surprising. But before that, Beverly did a degree in historical geography. And that meant she wrote a thesis, she's laughing already, in love, sex and marriage in medieval times. And I kind of thought that's probably somewhere between the Kama Sutra and 50 Shades of Grey. So I'm going to hand over to Beverly. Thank you very much.